I worked at the Fed.
Ask me how much I make.
I won't.
Don't ask me about my biggest trade.
Never.
Don't ask me about any right-wing
No simple
bullshit.
stuff here.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So, what do you think of the situation we're in, where Wall Street is paying so much attention to Federal Reserve policy instead of traditional market fundamentals? Do you think that's a healthy situation, or do you think it's problematic?
No, they work independently. The Federal Reserve policy is right now necessary, whether you're a fan of it or not, to navigate their way. They engaged the world after COVID, right? And I'm a firm believer if they had not done what they did during COVID, then we'd all be on red lines at the moment. So I'm a fan of it. But it's a matter of how do you unwind the trade.
Right.
So the market itself, right now, it's hard to, you have to realize where we're coming from. The world's been in a pandemic for 2.5 years. All the big companies around the world that we use on a daily basis had to shut themselves down to protect until the world comes back on, right? So stocks market does trade on some fundamentals. It's still trying to work its way past what we've been going through. So fundamentals are a little bit challenging at the moment. Federal Reserve's doing what it's doing. I'm more of a technical analyst type of a guy, so that's how I trade the market. But there are a lot of moving parts. But we have an economy that's trying to come out of inflation, come out of a pandemic, come out of supply chain issues, come out of all that stuff. And we have a Fed that got very proactive back in COVID. Now they buying mortgage-backed securities, buying bonds and all that, creating stimulus, throwing $3 trillion into the market. At some point, they got to unwind that trade. So they're independent.
What do you think of how Wall Street's viewing the Fed policy versus looking at traditional fundamentals as they have historically? Do you think that's a healthy relationship, or do you think that's a problem?
Well, the Fed's in tightening mode, right?
Yeah.
So my view is they're going to tighten until the economy shows visible signs of slowing down.
Do you think it's concerning that economic growth is so heavily correlated with Fed policy right now?
Well, it's concerning because the Fed really doesn't watch the stock market per se. The Fed's much more interested in the Treasury market, and they're much more interested in maintaining wage and price stability, much more so than what the levels of the stock market indexes are.
All right. Also, compared to traditional market fundamentals, do you think that's problematic, or do you think it's something we'll get by?
It's sort of problematic.
Yeah.
It's a scary situation. I think what's going to happen is obviously the November election. We'll see what happens with that.
What are your thoughts on how the market is viewing the Federal Reserve policy versus traditional market fundamentals? Do you think that's a healthy relationship historically?
I think the market's been spoiled by zero interest rates ever since we came out of the global financial crisis like 07, 08.
Right.
And I think that the economy, now of course the economy and the market are two different things, but I think that the economy can handle, most of the economy can handle slightly higher interest rates.
Right.
So if now the Fed funds rate is at what?
Like
2.25, 2.25, 2.5. It's probably going to 3 next week. They'll raise 75 basis points. I think the market can still handle that. The economy can handle that. But there are pockets of the economy that have companies that almost really shouldn't be in business and have only been able to survive because of zero interest rates. And my view is that if you're a company that can only survive on zero interest rates, you probably shouldn't be in business.
Right.
It's probably a bad business model.
Right.
So there's going to be a shakeout of a lot of these companies that have just been surviving off free money.
Yeah.
But I think longer term, the economy can handle that, but it has to go through a kind of a shakeout period.
Right. Do you think that the Fed will have the stomach to withstand that, or do you think there's a chance they pivot if there's too much pain in the corporate bond market? That's what they really pay attention to.
I think that they have to. What their objective right now is very clear. They've got to get interest rates up above the inflation rate.
Yeah. Do you think that's possible?
Which means interest rates have to go up, and the inflation rate has to come down.
Right.
Is it possible? Sure, it's possible, but it's probably not possible with a little bit of pain in the overall economy, which is what Powell talked about in his last at the Jackson Hole speech.
Yeah. Do you think that the Fed would pivot if they got concerned about the corporate bond market, or do you think they're determined to do whatever it takes to get inflation down?
Well, right now they seem pretty determined. I mean, when you say corporate bond market, if they saw what tremendous weakness in the corporate bond market,
Yeah, wasn't that what freaked them out last time?
yeah, I mean that could be your opinion. I mean, you know,
I've heard it.
you know,
I don't know if it's true.
It's a different set of circumstances this time around.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Do you think that the Fed will pivot anytime soon, or do you think that they're sticking to the course?
Oh, they're going to stick to the course.
Yeah.
I think they're going to stick to the course. They'll probably go up one more point before the year ends, maybe a point and a quarter.
Yeah.
And then from there, we'll see what happens next year. Again, what happens with the elections in November, we'll have a big telling tale of it.
So do you think it's possible to have a situation where we could have economic growth while having real rates not being negative?
Yeah, absolutely. You just say everyone has to understand that there's no playbook for coming out of a global pandemic, right? I think we forgot what it was like.
Yeah.
We were like locked in our house for 6 months. People were dying in the friggin' streets. We got to be real.
Right.
Nobody was getting on planes and trains and automobiles. No one was buying gas. No one was doing shit except sitting on Zoom in their pajamas and buying shit on eBay. Right? So everybody had to shut their thing down. Companies that we use on a daily basis had to shut down. So when you just can't hit a switch and everything's all working again, it takes a while to get online, right? You know, they weren't cutting trees and making lumber for a while. Well, you got to go get the trees, do that, and then nobody wants to go back to work, right? So it's a complicated story. We need to remember that we're starting to churn back. We don't know how to get through this. This is an unknown on every day. The Federal Reserve is just trying to do the best they can. This is my opinion. A lot of people don't like J-Pow. They think it's all full of shit, whatever. I'm not a fan of that. I like what's going on. It's a complicated story. It's an unknown every day. How we're going to reopen. People going back to movies, to travel, to this. How the supply chain issues are happening. People don't want to go back to work. That completely is a wild card in this crazy shit. I don't believe we're in a recession. A recession involves a lot of layoffs. We got 11 million jobs that nobody wants to take. We just have to figure out how the fuck to put them together.
Right.
Excuse my language.
No, all good. Love it. Do you think that there's ever a scenario in which we could grow the economy without negative real rates?
Without
negative real rates, how, like with the rates being below the CPI?
When do I ever make you pay for chocolate?
Well, you can, but you would also need pro-growth fiscal policies from the administration, and you don't have that right now. You have zero growth policies from the administration. Now, we had zero growth policies through all of Obama's presidency, but you know, the economy grew at a very, very, very moderate rate, and that's why when we came out of that period, all these economists said, well, 1% to 2% growth, that's just the new normal right now. There's no reason it has to be the new normal. It's only the new normal if you have a zero growth policy coming from the administration.
Right. Now, what do you think are some policies that could change that?
Lower taxes, less regulation. You know, probably the most positive effect that Trump's policies had on the economy was that he cut back the regulatory burden on businesses was cut back significantly, and that was probably underreported and underemphasized because it's the one area it's the hardest thing to quantify.
So that gets into this concept of the inflation being more of a supply issue than a demand issue, right? In the sense of, people say that it's a liquidity issue, there's so much liquidity out there, but in reality, if we were producing
there's a lot
at a rate,
less liquidity now because we're finally unwinding
tightening
a lot of the qualitative easing that went on for, you know, well over 10 years.
Right.
I mean, they could have stopped that they could have started to wind that down in 2013, 2014. The economy had been strong then, but they didn't want to. I think because they wanted to keep just interest rates at zero.
Do you think there's ever a possibility to have growth without negative real interest rates?
That's an interesting question. The short answer is yes. I think we could grow in a normal interest rate environment, yes. I think it's possible. Sure.
What do you think the factors would have to be in place for that to happen?
Well, I think you'd need kind of a more moderate level of the dollar, for starters. Right now the dollar is king, and It's creating lots of kind of knock-on problems all over the world. So that would be one element of it. And then, the basics that go into wage and price stability, advancing productivity, good job market, upward mobility,
Some more
all those
business-friendly
things.
policy.
Could be, it could be. Although, that's really not the Fed's job. That's
Yeah.
really the Congress' job.
Yeah. So do you think that we can ever get to a situation where we do not need negative real rates for the economy to grow?
Well, the rates got to go up a little bit, but they got to sort of get into a finding area, and that's probably not till at least until it hits maybe 6.5%, 7%, and then they'll probably come down a little bit.
Yeah. Do you think that the Fed will pivot anytime soon, or do you think that they're sticking to the course?
Oh, they're going to stick to the course.
Yeah.
I think they're going to stick to the course. They'll probably go up one more point before year end, maybe a point and a quarter.
Yeah.
And then from there, we'll see what happens next year. Again, what happens with the elections in November, we'll have a big telling tale of it.
Do you think that more people than not suffer from the negative real interest rates? I know it's necessary for the situation we're in to have negative real rates, but do you think that hurts, kind of the average person
Well,
that can't borrow?
it's you're asking two questions. I mean, one is it hurts savers, and it forces people who ordinarily might be savers of fixed income investments. It pushes them into equity investments, which may or may not be well advised.
Some people say end the Fed. Some people say reform the Fed. Some people say give the Fed more power. What do you think's the right road?
I just think that I just think that myself personally, I would just leave it the way it is.
Yeah.
I mean, if anything, the Fed needs to be more independent.
Yeah. Yeah. You think they get pressure from the?
Of course they do.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think they've done over the long term a pretty good job of just brushing that off.
Yeah. Some people say end the Fed. Some people say reform the Fed. Some people say give the Fed more power. Do you fall into any of those camps?
I think I would like to give the Fed a little less power because I think you need more of a group effort between 2 and 3 different parties, to figure out the real way to go about it.
Yeah, gotcha. So there's a lot of debate on what the correct future of the Fed would be, or the ideal future of the Fed. Some people say end the Fed. Some people say reform the Fed. Some people say give the Fed more power. Which camp do you fall into, if any?
Well, you need a central banking. Someone has to do that central banking function. So we need a Fed. The Fed's mandate is wage and price stability. As long as they kind of stay in their lane, I think they provide an essential, useful, and absolutely necessary role.
Do you think it was a mistake to give them the dual mandate in the 70s?
No. As a matter of fact, not to age myself, I worked at the Fed in the 70s.
Oh, wow, really?
So,
That's cool.
no.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've heard some people argue that they're sort of contradictory mandates because it's one's price stability and the other is employment. So do you think that they could accomplish both those at once?
I think the Fed's overriding concern is always price stability.
Yeah.
And the Fed understands that their actions may result in increasing levels of unemployment or dislocations in the labor market. And certainly this chairman seems to acknowledge that, and his mentality or his attitude appears to be, we're going to do what we need to do to get, to stabilize prices.
Yeah. Would you have done anything differently if you were Jerome Powell over the last 2 years, or do you think his timeline was appropriate in all cases?
Well, you know what? He told the world he was data-driven. He essentially has been data-driven in his, guidance for the board as far as what actions the board should take, and people don't like that because they love to second guess what the Fed is doing, but that's reality. There's data inherently is lagged. So Fed policy making, this criticism of the Fed, never, getting out ahead of the curve, I think that's kind of lazy thinking because the Fed really, if they're data dependent, they're always going to be behind the curve.
Yeah. Okay. So you don't think they were a little slow last year when we saw the inflation going up a couple months in a row.
Well, I mean, you're asking me to look in the rearview mirror, and
Yeah.
hindsight's 2020. It's easy to say now, yeah, the Fed should have been more aggressive, but the reality is there were plenty of reasons to think that it was going to be a quote-unquote transitory episode, and that was proven wrong. But like I say, it's hindsight's always 2020.
Gotcha. What do you think about the energy situation in regard to using our strategic petroleum reserve to artificially? So we got OPEC lately saying that we're disrupting the physical oil market compared to the paper price of it, and that they're not happy about that.
So the best thing I can tell you about my opinion about energy is I don't like to mess with things where the players in the game are so powerful that they don't call me when they're going to do some shit.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like, people ask about crypto. Well, the crypto market has got some big whales in it. They do what they want to do and they fling it around, and some people get caught up in the big wave.
Yeah.
Energy. I don't know when Iran's going to jump in and do some crazy shit. I don't know when the Saudis are going to dump 1 billion barrels a day on the market. I don't know when Venezuela is going to get back involved. I don't know what the U.S. is going to do with reserves, whether we have more or less or release them. So when there's so many moving parts, and I'm not privy to that, I'm a believer in probability and edge. So if I don't know what the big guys are doing, and the big guys just tip their pinky and shit changes, I kind of stay away.
Right. Gotcha.
So I don't have an opinion.
Okay. So what do you think about ESG and the role it's playing in big corporations?
I just think it's been sold as a complete fraud on the financial markets.
Yeah.
And there's a couple groups now that are starting to push back on it. And I think it's just been the concept of it has been totally abused and miscommunicated from people like BlackRock, although they deny it.
Yeah.
He's tried to walk that line pretty carefully.
Yeah.
And walk back a lot of things that he was saying about it for a long time. And I think that you can be about green energy until you're blue in the face, but the reality is the technology is just not there yet.
Yeah. I wish we would go nuclear. It seems like the right answer.
Well, that's the thing. That's the answer. But you got to realize the same crowd that's against fossil fuels, they were screaming about the evils of nuclear power 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So
That makes sense.
yeah, but that is the answer.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Right. I mean, if you look at a place like France,
Yeah.
they've got huge amounts of nuclear power.
Yeah.
There and totally safe.
What do you have an opinion on ESG and the role it's playing with corporations in environmental governance?
I'm an environmentalist. I'm
Yeah.
a believer in climate change. I'm a believer if we don't get our shit together, we're going to be in deep trouble.
Yeah.
The fact that a lot of the big corporations are now putting some money towards it and whatnot is wonderful. There should be a lot more of it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the world isn't ready for it for some reason. It's one of those things we're in big denial.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if we look around at what's going on weather-wise and what's going on, the melting caps and all that other shit and the weather we've been living through, we should get a sense that my gut is, unfortunately, it's going to be too late before we realize what's going on, and I think we're going to end up in trouble. If anybody who's in power can be proactive and get people involved in that business, I'm a fan.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm a big fan of nuclear energy for that reason, and I've been a bit confused as to why policymakers have not pushed nuclear energy and for green
You know what?
energy.
I got just because it's a wild card.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of just the word gets people edgy, and they don't understand that it's actually a clean energy and can be
Right.
incredibly helpful. They just think of a nuclear bomb. They don't understand nuclear energy, right?
Yeah.
And that's where you've got to disconnect, I think.
Would you agree that it's probably the best combination of efficiency? And,
I don't know.
No?
It's
Okay.
it's not my wheelhouse.
Gotcha. Do you think money is being driven out of New York because of anti-friendly monetary policy?
Well, not just monetary policy, but right now it's being driven out of New York just because of the out of control crime in the city.
Yeah. Do you think there's ever a chance to have a more moderate governor in New York?
It's possible.
Yeah.
I mean, allegedly Zeldin is only 4 points behind in the polls.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that would be a monumental upset. But if he got enough financial backing to advertise, heavily the next 6 weeks.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's possible. I don't think she's wildly popular. She's never been elected to anything.
Right, and she made that crazy statement that all Republicans should leave because they don't belong here.
Right.
It's a little extreme.
Right. Well, they really believe that.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Do you feel that there's like a lean one way or the other in the financial world as far as
We already did that.
which political direction they go towards?
15 minutes.
Most establishment C-suite people on Wall Street have always been Democrats.
Yeah.
And they are very, very, very much pro-establishment people.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that was great about Trump was that he was hated as much by the establishment Republicans as he was by the Democrats.
Right.
So I always felt, well, he's got to be on the right track.
Yeah. I agree.
So I think that they will, but I do think they've been woken up quite a bit by the hard socialist left.
Yeah.
End bail, end jails, let all the criminals run free.
Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you go into a CVS now or a Walgreens, Duane Reade, everything's locked up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they had to spend a lot of money to do that.
Yeah.
But they couldn't have people just come in and take everything they want off the shelves and,
Right. Do you think inflation's driven more by supply issues or demand issues?
Well, I mean, we've had a very interesting last 18 months because we had inflation that was really kind of supply chain driven, which is highly unusual. There was a demonstration of just how vulnerable we are to cracks in that chain, breaks in those linkages. So those were kind of supply-driven causes of inflation.
Yeah.
As far as demand, then when everyone kind of left their apartments and houses, joined the human race again, then you had like a demand push where all of a sudden people were traveling, people were out, people were spending money, and then it shifted very quickly to more of a demand focus. So it's kind of a strange hybrid that we're in right now.
Okay, I'll give you the last one here. So, do you have any thoughts on the New York governor saying that this is not a place for Republicans and that they should all leave, or
This is not
that Republicans do not belong here and that they should leave?
Republicans do not belong
the New York
here?
governor said that.
You know what? I don't know her. I don't know if she's done anything that I'm that proud of. You know what? I'm really distraught at the divisiveness of both parties.
Yep.
Although I do stray towards one party than the other, I think we need to more. The fact that we now, if you and I disagree about a political situation, then we are no longer friends and we can't have Thanksgiving dinner together. It's like there's so much hate around, and that's insane. I think there is a party out there that is psychotic and fascist, so that may have tipped my card which side I'm on. I think the shit that's going on is crazy. There's way too much hate. People, a party that doesn't want government control suddenly wants to control everyone else's lives. Seems a little bit of a weird paradox to me, right? So that's a little bit disconnect for me. The fact that we almost just lost our democracy is a little bit scary for me, and that people are still supporting the big lie. So that tips my card for sure. I'd love everybody. I don't mind what side you're on, as long as there's a discussion, right? And there's communication, negotiation, right? The fact that it's this or this and you in the middle is insane. It doesn't lead anywhere good.
Yeah.
It is completely a breakdown of communication.